The Living Zen-podcast is a gift from the Victoria Zen Centre. If you enjoy it, please forget about making a donation. Instead, rate it, review it, and share it with a friend that you think will enjoy it as much as you did. You may also consider purchasing the Living Zen-podcast app, which is now available on the iTunes App Store. Thank you for listening. Another wonderful year of Zen practice, and my legs are telling me that I should have sat much more over the holidays. The chanting was, it felt okay, but then when it came time to stand up, I felt I only had half of a body. So it was more zazen over the holidays. But holidays, a time to spend with family and relax too. So the zendo became partially zendo and partially lounging area. So it was lovely. Starting a new year of practice, first off, I want to say how wonderful it is to be back in the zendo, to be back with all of you practicing, and to really just mention how fantastic, how rich your practice has become as we've practiced together. And I'm sure you don't see it. I think that all of us can get really caught up, as always, in doing things right, or messing things up, or getting things down just like the book says. And it's easy to do that in Zen because there's so much structure. Every aspect of the form and of life, we try to sort of lay out, this is the way that we collaboratively do it together in this center. And so we can get stuck on that. We can get really fixed on that. But in truth, Zen practice is what happens when things don't go by the book. We set up all of these guidelines and all of these rules, and no matter how tight, no matter how studied, no matter how practiced, no matter how rehearsed we are as individual Zen practitioners, we find that there is never two practice sessions, never 2 days of practice which are alike. Stuff goes awry all the time. And what that structure provides us with is this laboratory, is the walls of this experimental ground in which we can say, when things don't go according to the book, what happens? And when we're inexperienced, or when we're caught up in our small I self, when we're caught up in me, we get very quickly into right and wrong. I did it correctly, and therefore that person is wrong. Or I messed up, and therefore I'm wrong. Oh, the form, the book, the rules, the ritual, the Zen, it's all wrong. And we hang on to ourselves. But once we've practiced for a while, there comes this beautiful smile, this beautiful recognition in practice where we just drop it and go, well, right or wrong at this moment are completely irrelevant. The activity of the moment, the activity that it's unfolding as what we call this moment, is flowing, it's acting, it's not waiting for us to determine who was right or wrong based on these entirely made-up subjective kind of guidelines. It's flowing. So are we able to drop the brick, drop the structure, and flow harmoniously with the activity as it unfolds, or do we grab on and sink with the brick? And it's important to understand that both of these activities, both of these choices, both of these ways of engaging and making relationship are crucial to Zen practice. It's not just trying to be perfect all the time, trying to flow all the time, trying to always let go, but also to experience what happens when we grab on, what happens when we polarize, what happens when we separate. And this whole structure of form, this whole way that we practice, is one that it just lays things bare. Which was it? Did we let it go and flow, or did we grab the brick and sink? And either way is okay. We go, oh, geez, maybe we don't even do it right away. Maybe we don't do it during that sit. Maybe a week later or the next time the same situation arises, we recognize it. Oh, there's that brick again. But what I can see ripening, what I can see happening in people's practice, particularly as we practice together, is this playfulness, is this relationship and interaction, which goes beyond domination, victory, and defeat. It becomes sparring. It becomes training for the purpose of helping each other to awaken. It becomes the practice of bodhisattvas, awakening beings who are engaged in the activity of awakening not only themselves, but each other and all things. This is very much what the next case is about, but I wanted to talk about a few things before I get to the case. And because I do like to talk, I don't know that we'll get to the case today. One of the things that comes up, I think often in Rinzai Zen, is when these talks, when Teisho is presented, that there's a disconnect or there's a difficulty that people have. There's a couple, actually. The first is people will come to the interview room and they'll say something like, "Oh, that was a really great talk. I have no idea what you were on about, but it was I really enjoyed it." And this points to something which is crucial, I think, in Zen practice, and particularly in Rinzai Zen practice. The way that we study in the West, or the way that we go about education, investigation, scholarship, I guess, is quite different than the traditional way of practice or study that comes through the Zen tradition. Over this, past couple of months, I've been rereading The Lord of the Rings. I read The Lord of the Rings when I was 12 years old. And then I read The Lord of the Rings when I was about 18 or maybe 20 years old. And now I'm reading it again. It's the same book, but it's completely not the same book. I'm not the same person who's meeting the book. And I think that the way that we study in the West most often is diversification. We study a different subject all the time. Or we follow a subject down a path until its very, very end is like sequels to death. Yeah. And we never take the time to actually come back to the origin of what it is that we're reading, what it is that we're studying. In Zen practice, we are not studying a diversity of things. We bring ourselves over and over and over again to the activity that's taking place right here in front of us. This activity is always fresh, is always unique, is always, awe-inspiring. And yet, many people, when we sit down in front of this moment, when we sit down and turn ourselves into the activity which is unfolding in this moment, we find it boring. How can we just sit there and look at the floor? Isn't that boring? Don't you get bored when you're sitting. This is the sort of intellectual, conceptual, I am self looking at what's taking place this moment. You're just sitting there. You're just breathing. Exactly the same thing that you were doing a second ago. Exactly the same thing that you were doing 5 seconds ago. There's nothing happening. Aren't you bored? Can we go do something new now? And our practice is to recognize that this breath, while in structure, in form, in activity, is identical, perhaps, to the one just before it. It is also entirely different. It's completely a different I who meets this breath that has met the breath just before. This breath, the I that meets this breath will be born and die before the I am that meets the next breath arises. This activity is unfolding and acting, arising and dissolving over and over and over again. That's what we engage in. This is Zen practice. Teisho, this activity of giving a talk, this is something that I've heard many people try to talk about or try to describe or try to explain or grasp some understanding of what's going on in Teisho, the Dharma talk. Teisho is the word that is used to describe Dharma talk. But Dharma talk is a piss-poor translation of Teisho. Teisho means to present a shout. And it harkens back to these old masters, Obaku, Huangbo in Chinese, and Linji, who literally during their talks would shout, "Gah!" And there's a difference between like reading something to even listening to something or hearing about something, and the visceral experience of being in the room when somebody shouts. It is not your intellect that gets stirred by it, but your whole being. The experience of presenting a shout is a physical manifestation of the state of the person who is shouting. And we experience it on every level, through every sense, in every way. Completely different than just saying, and then he shouted. Oh, I get it. So when Sasaki Roshi was asked, and the reason that you can't go to the bookstore and buy Joshu Sasaki books is because his feeling about Teisho is that what's critical about a Teisho happens there. It is a dynamic interaction between the teacher who's giving the talk and the assembly who is present at that moment, in that dynamic point in the activity of time that we call. It's a relationship. And so its container, its structure are words and environment and concepts. But when you take those things and you put them down in a book, you write them down, you immediately remove the most crucial aspect of Teisho, which is the living presence, the presentation of the shout. It's the difference between what happens in your body when someone shouts and reading, and then he shouted. I hope you can grasp this. So, I want to tie a few loose ends together here. One of the other comments, or one of the comments that I mentioned, and another comment is, I'm really trying to grasp this Muman Kan stuff, or I'm really trying to grasp what it is that you're talking about. But I don't have any clue what these koans are all about, and I don't get Rinzai at all. And there's always a sense of disappointment or frustration or low self-esteem or not worthiness or something like that. And this, I think it comes from the way that we study in the West, which is we feel like we can't go forward with our study until we thoroughly grasp the subject that's being taught today. There's fear around it. There's anxiety around it. Well, I should tell you that I don't think that the Joshu Sasaki Roshi has been teaching, I'm just going to sort of ballpark, like in North America, like almost 50 years at this point. And I think he's covered about 4 books over and over and over again. So it's not as if you're going to be left behind in kindergarten when Eshu continues on to bigger and better books. These books, Rinzai Roku, the Record of Rinzai, Muman Kan, Diamond Sutra, maybe he only does 3. The point is that when we sit, we want to let go of the idea of acquisitiveness, the idea that we're going to catch something that we don't have, that we must understand in order for our practice to be real, or in order for us to progress, or in order for us to continue to develop. These are not teachings that point to something outside of your experience. They are observations about the fundamental nature of the activity which is unfolding in every moment. So much like, for me, reading Lord of the Rings at 12 years old, there are things and words and concepts which elude me entirely. And yet, underneath, there is a story about a hobbit taking a ring to a volcano. I can follow that part. So all of the other stuff I don't trouble myself with. I don't go off the path looking at dictionaries or looking up this and that or asking experts about it. I just follow the story. And I'm practicing. So when I'm listening to a Teisho, I don't trouble myself with understanding the source of every word or grasping the concept of everything that's being said. That's all up here in the frontal lobes. That's all heady, conceptual, intellectual speak. Roshi used to say, you need to open up a hole under your belly button and listen from there. And that's when we're listening to Teisho, when we're experiencing the presentation. Don't just stick your head out. You want to sort of listen from your abdomen. The metaphor I often use is like if you have a river and it's flowing, and you just want your presence in that is just like lowering a grate down into the river. And for the most part, you let it flow through without trying to grab on to anything, without trying to stop or control or avoid anything that's flowing down the river. Occasionally, something will get hung up on one of your great bars, and we go, oh, what's that all about? But already, even then, we've grasped the the intellectual mind has grasped a concept and has begun playing with it. Just let it flow. My experience of practicing Teisho with Sasaki Roshi was often like swimming in an ocean. And he would say, come and dive with me. And take my hand and dive. And he would continue to dive and continue to dive. And I would be diving with him. And then at a certain point in his Teisho, I would realize that I needed to breathe. And I couldn't continue. So I would come up for some air and sort of land at intellectual I am self. And then having recovered, dive again. This experience of just letting yourself go into the activity of Teisho, letting go into the practice of experiencing dissolving into Teisho without the grasping desire, the must make sense of this, must understand, must grasp this in order to progress. Because if my hope is that you will all continue to practice for as long as you live, and to let go of worrying about whether or not you'll get this particular concept or this particular aspect or this particular principle, and take comfort in knowing that this will be cyclical, circular. Many people come to interview and they say, gosh, Eshu, you've been saying that one thing for like the 6 years that I've known you, and I just got it. Yeah? So just like that, today reading Lord of the Rings, it's a very different book. I understand it on many more different levels, and yet still there is this story of a hobbit taking a ring to a volcano. So, I hope, how long have I been talking, Jikijitsu?
20 minutes.
20 minutes. Okay, I'm just gonna say a few more words. In the Rinzai tradition, there are understood to be 3 pillars or 3 cornerstones of practice. Zazen, the act of seated jhana, dissolution, what we call meditation, is one of the cornerstones. The second is Teisho. It's considered to be of critical importance to practice with a teacher to experience Teisho. And the third cornerstone is Sanzen, interview, question and response, or if it is the case, koan practice with a teacher. This is what keeps the practice dynamic, active, flowing in Zen practice. So I just want everybody to really pay attention to practice as we go forward this year. At the Victoria Zen Centre, we really have put forward some effort, some resources to make the 3 cornerstones available as we can. Making talks available so that you can download them online. The argument that I always had with the Roshi or the Roshi's attitude towards the recording or the transcribing of talks is that I agree entirely. There is no substitute for being present at a Dharma talk. But for those who are completely unable, for those who, because of their circumstances, because of timing, because of life, aren't able to attend in person, I don't think that it's a matter of eat or starve. I think that, each has its own. I personally feel that the listening to is an improvement on reading, but even reading is a little morsel that maybe we can get some nutrition out of. But we have to recognize, we have to acknowledge, we have to be aware of how we read, of how we listen, and let go of the idea of acquiring, grasping, getting, stacking up, amassing, just reading, letting it pass through, letting what resonates resonate, and letting everything else drop away. If we have a good book of talks, we read it through once and we think, that was really good. Just keep that one. And in 6 months or a year, read that one again, rather than always looking for a new one. Okay, so I guess we'll start next time on case 11. Thank you all, and I'm very much looking forward to another year of practice. It's wonderful to have such good company. Thank you.
The Living Zen podcast is a gift from the Victoria Zen Centre. If you enjoy it, please forget about making a donation. Instead, rate it, review it, and share it with a friend that you think will enjoy it as much as you did. You may also consider purchasing the Living Zen podcast app, which is now available on the iTunes App Store. Thank you for listening.